Is it Remy?
Hey, Mrs. Metcalf. Oh, dear God.
Oh!
Careful. Oh, there it goes.
Oh!
Kaya mo yan, Ginger. Yan! Yay!
Oh, dear Lord.
Hey!
I'm my daughter's dog. Oh, boy. Who's a good dog, Hazel? Who's the bestest? Well, that's a cute picture to end that one on. Hey, Heavy D, how you doing, bud? If you can listen, you know, we're more of a listening type thing. Except for when I try to bring the mood to. Yeah, switch everything back over. I watched Hill Pirate stuff from last night. Some funny stuff. Guess there was Spurgin on the menu. DP. Well, for those of you who are just stopping by to say hello, y'all know what it is. Let's do that. All right. Yeah, I hear yet another breakup is in his and then today on Vips's stuff, he was talking about how I'm a lonely boy and can't make friends. The difference is in keeping them. Um, so all right, we finally made it to chapter 5. So let's get to it. we love we love you, Heavy D. You know that. Just war. War is a morally dubious and difficult activity. Michael Walzer. The triumph of just war theory and the dangers of success. In early January of 2010, a squad from Charlie Company 16 got pinned down in a gully under fire from Taliban fighters holed up in an adobe farm compound in southern Afghanistan. The Marines had just arrived in the country, part of the surge of 30,000 troops President Obama had ordered to strengthen prosecution of the war. The president had used his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech a few weeks earlier to justify his decision to expand the U.S. effort. After 8 years of fighting, the physical, mental, and moral casualties were mounting. Jacob Sexton had shot himself that fall in a movie theater in Farmland, Indiana. Obama had visited the wounded at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington and had come out shaken. I don't want to be going to Walter Reed for another 8 years, he said. Now, his Nobel speech in Stockholm, he explained, I face the world as it is and cannot stand idle in the face of threats to the American people. For make no mistake, evil does exist in the world. A nonviolent movement could not have halted Hitler's armies. Negotiations cannot convince Al Qaeda's leaders to lay down their arms. To say that force may sometimes be necessary is not a call to cynicism. It is a recognition of history, the imperfections of man, and the limits of reason. Hi, Mrs. McHale. Um, as we look at this, and now that the horrors of the pullout of Afghanistan are just the pullout are fully realized, not the ramifications, because the ramifications are going to be coming for years and years, unfortunately. We see that the man who he did step into the role leading the wars, but he needed to own it. He tried to justify it by with this. He promised to get us out of Afghanistan. He did not. Trump negotiated with the Taliban at Camp David. He did not. Going on that negotiation, Biden administration did a horrible botched job. Hey, Mr. Rican, of pulling out. And we saw what that looked like. But the responsibility always lays with the um, the commander in chief. We have if you've been noticing, there's been a lot of talk on in the media and stuff, and especially YouTube about Master Sergeant Chapman, who was killed in Afghanistan when he was with working with Blue from DevGru, and the Medal of Honor fight and the pure disrespect that has been given to him and his family over this, and the Navy pushing it. And look, medals are not medals, but the Medal of Honor is for a reason. I haven't seen the video since that day. I watched it again today. I remember the SIGINT, but a narrative was followed because that's what was people wanted to happen. Sorry, I'm going down this tangent. Now there's a fight between CIA GBRS contractors and force over Benghazi. Native Bahala brought up a good point about he thought we had pinned who was directly responsible for the fault of that attack. He says it was Hillary. I say it was Obama. Did the State Department try to create a narrative? Yeah. But I don't know why I went down this tangent. But hearing him winning the Nobel Peace Prize and knowing how many more years, we still had 12 years to go before we pulled out of Afghanistan. So horrendously. But if you're going to take credit for things, presidents, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, take the bad with it as well. Own what you've done to a generation of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, civilians, the general public, families. Hey, Wingspan. All right, let me finish his speech. Sorry for the tangent. We must begin by acknowledging the hard truth, Obama said. We will not eradicate violent conflict in our lifetimes. There will be times when the nations, acting individually or in concert, will find the use of force not only necessary, but morally justified. Say morally justified from your ivory tower all you want. It is unlikely anyone in Charlie 1-6 had heard the president's endorsement of war as a necessary lesser evil. Had any of them recalled and repeated aloud the eloquent phrases about morally justifiable war and the desperation of their shallow stone gully on that awful day in early 2010? He might have been greeted with hoots of derisive laughter. At the moment, unable to move forward or back without exposing themselves to the Taliban's deadly gunfire, a handful of Marines of Charlie 16 were too busy trying to survive. It was a bad situation in Afghanistan's Helmand province in 2010. Marjo, the town U.S. troops were charged with liberating from the Taliban, was spread out across a labyrinth of cross-hatching irrigation canals, adobe-walled compounds separated by dirt paths, and acres of alternating bare, stony ground and steamy poppy fields. The Marines of Charlie 16 faced, at some distance, a compound typical of that part of southern Afghanistan, a modest farmhouse of 3 or 4 dirt-floored rooms, with perhaps a lean-to shelter for cooking and crude pens for goats and chickens, all of them enclosed by adobe walls that rose in places to 5 or 6 feet. Families living this hard-scrabble existence would scatter when American troops moved into the area, fearing the gun battles that would ensue, and sure enough, this patrol came under fire from gunmen hidden somewhere within the compound, and the Marines drove down to the goalie's modest cover to figure out what to do next. 2 of them, Joey Shiano and Chuck Newton, took turns cautiously raising their heads to see if they could pinpoint where the shots were coming from. Despite their age, Joey was 22, Chuck 25. They were seasoned combat infantrymen on their second deployment. They ducked at a whooshing sound, and a rocket-propelled grenade exploded in the tree over their heads, and branches and twigs clattered down on them. Finally, Joey spotted a muzzle flash and slid excitedly. Newton inched up to take a cautious look. I don't see him. Which window? Where? Newton was trained and assigned as a saw gunner. The shoulder-fired multi-purpose assault weapon was the squad's most powerful weapon, but he couldn't see the shooters. Let me do it, Joey yelled, and Newton shouted, I'll cover for you, and handed over the small. Joey lifted the 54-inch tube on his okay, I got it. To his shoulder, rose into a crouch, squinted into the viewfinder, and focused on the section of the blank wall. Then he fired. The small is a descendant of the World War II bazooka, designed to disable tanks and blow apart concrete bunkers. Against adobe, it is devastating. The blast demolished one end of the building. As the rubble and dust settled, the Marines could hear shouting and wailing. They wanted to bring out the wounded, the Marines interpreter reported. The Taliban gunners fled, and the survivors dragged out the torn and bleeding bodies, some draped over wheelbarrows. It became clear that the Taliban had intended to use women and children as human shields, hurting them behind the wall that the small had struck. The Marines were stunned. I mean, all of us would have stopped for a kid. We'd rather have the entire squad mowed down than to put a family in jeopardy, Newton said later. Joey's thing was, we're taking fire from that building, and there are Taliban there. Who would ever think they'd put a family in there? That's how they won the day, Newton told me, still furious 5 years later at what he saw as the Taliban's moral deceit. That's the only way they can get over on us, by tricking us. They didn't outgun us or kill any of our guys, but they won the day by baiting us into killing civilians. More moral injury, right? Joey Shiano was shattered at the carnage he'd caused. He just broke down sobbing, said Stephen Canty, Shiano's squad mate. Thing is, you couldn't have known. It wasn't within the Marines' mindset at that time that the enemy would desperately put women and children at risk for tactical advantage. Charlie 1-6 was not yet hardened to the butchery that would characterize this combat in Marja, but they were learning fast. And as Canty often reminded himself, once you know the truth of war, you can't know it ever. The doctrine of just war holds, as Obama noted, that war should be a moral response to a grave wrong, the self defense response to aggression, or an effort to rescue or protect victims of injustice. The value of war lies in its being not only a salve to the conscience of the king or president who orders troops into battle, but as a reassurance to the troops themselves that the killing they do is morally righteous. Otherwise, it is murder. Might have been moral tactic by the enemy, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean they're still it's the shadow culture, right, Woodrow? Their things, property, not valued as highly as that of a military aged male. Good to see you, Woodrow. Rationales for war have been around a long time. Political theorist Michael Walzer, professor emeritus at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study, notes that ancient Greeks argued about the conditions under which war could be justified. And so did early Islamic scholars. There are references to such debates in the Bible and Plato's Republic, written some 24 centuries ago. The Greek philosopher justified war as a natural instinct for survival of a just state, that is, Athens against the threat of surrounding unjust states, making the Greeks believe was a legitimate and justified right of the people. Hey, Linda. The early Christian church swerved sharply away from that idea, unambiguously rejecting participation in the military and in war in any form. Over time, that position proved untenable as the church sought to defend its holdings against the rising Germanic tribes, including the Visigoths who sacked Rome in 410. Christians needed to make war and kill, and in the 5th century, theologian St. Augustine, an African bishop, came to the rescue. Killing was okay. Augustine declared in the City of God, published in AD CE 426, if God or political leaders said so. They who have waged war in obedience to the divine command or in conformity with his laws have represented that in their persons the public justice or the wisdom of government, and in this capacity have put to death wicked men. Such persons have by no means violated the commandment, thou shalt not kill. In essence, Augustine's new doctrine relieved individual soldiers of responsibility for killing and put this immense power to declare killing just or not, just or not, in the hands of higher authority. That was the church. By Augustine's writ, Christian pacifists became Christian warriors. Of course, it was easy, demonstrably too easy, to claim divine command. As your jus ad bellum, it was the concept of just war. Okay. That enabled 13th century Christians, directed by Pope Urban II, to crusade against slaughter Muslims, but the elaborate rhetorical and philosophical gymnastics that religious and secular leaders performed as they battled over religion and conquest largely faded away with the rise of sovereign nation states, whose leaders felt their military excursions needed no justification, save for some outspoken moralists. Few raised just war objections to the Civil War or the Franco-Prussian War, the Opium Wars, or the Spanish-American War. Hey, Cap. The United States swept into the final year of slaughter in World War I on a wave of indignant moral determination to end all wars, as President Wilson put it. All right, Richard, be safe. That idea culminated in the 1928 Kellogg-Briand Pact, outlawing war altogether. It was solemnly signed by all the major nations that plunged into a global conflict just a few years later. Not until the Vietnam War in the 1960s did just war doctrine come into vogue, seized upon by the anti-war left as a legitimate basis for opposing what was seen as an unjust war. But critically, it was the military's own embrace of just war that revived the doctrine as a useful tool of modern statecraft. The United States fought in Vietnam under a counterinsurgency doctrine, which required winning the hearts and minds of the local population. That meant the American cause, its warfighting methods, and especially its treatment of civilians, had to be seen as just. In practice, of course, carpet bombing, Agent Orange, defoliant, napalm, assassinations, and forced relocations made our hearts and minds counterinsurgency campaign a cruel hoax. But the idea was implanted, and some military strategists began speaking of the U.S. defeat in Vietnam as a failure to pursue a just war. That idea became thoroughly embedded in the strategies that framed the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. As Princeton's Michael Walzer wrote in 2002, there are now reasons of state for fighting justly. One might almost say that justice has become a military necessity. That meant, he wrote, that we should not fight wars about whose justice we are doubtful, and that once we are engaged, we have to fight justly so as not to antagonize the civilian population, whose political support is necessary to a military victory. Much of the way the United States fights today stems from just war doctrine. The military's rigorous effort, if imperfectly realized, to avoid causing civilian casualties, its practice of paying cash to the families of each civilian killed by U.S. forces, its placement of lawyers into tactical operations centers to ensure compliance with just war concepts and issuing rules of engagement to guide the behavior of individual troops. Shout out to Free Fire Zone. Modern adaptation of just war doctrine neatly resolves the problem of determining whether a killing is justified or murder. Yeah, Woodrow, that remember when we studied the Soviet model, right? That was it was easy then, right? Your uniform on uniform, your covert, the covert. I mean, you knew who the players were for the most part, even in the covert side. Um, and I mean, uh, so, okay. When Iraq and Afghanistan were popping off, we were planning for a whole other type of war at the time. Um, I attended war games and strategy sessions from the war college on down to the intel school. Um, addressing an issue that came up after we were fully engaged and on our way out of Afghanistan. Not quite yet, but um, when a certain former republic started invading other people. Uh, so yeah, it's when you look like the population and everything, it makes it harder. It does indeed. But when you take out a wall and enemies using human shields, sometimes it's hard to get over the moral injury of that. 15 centuries after Augustine, yeah. But yeah, I mean, isn't it always because nothing's ever the same? Hey, Misty. Right, Cap? 15 centuries after Augustine, we have returned to the idea that if you are fighting evil, you are excused from the biblical commandment, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. Just fixed translation. Your cause has to be just a bit less evil than the enemies. A bit less evil than the enemies. The Catholic Church put it this way in its 1992 catechism. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders greater than the evil to be eliminated. Lesser evils, okay? In its most recent incarnation, though the application of just war has been too easy, too convenient after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, as confusion and fear hardened the into a demand for revenge. I'll say again, revenge. President George W. Bush and many others invoked just war doctrine as the basis for the morally righteous killing of the alleged perpetrators in Afghanistan. But Bush, rather than simply acknowledging the emotionally satisfying and morally justifiable decision to strike back, invoked the concepts of good and evil. vowing to use the military to rid the world of evildoers. With U.S. troops pouring into Afghanistan to pursue evildoers, in February 2002, Bush declared, "Our cause is just. Our war against terror is only beginning." Within a few weeks, the terrorists responsible for 9/11 attacks were gone from Afghanistan, fled into neighboring Pakistan. Washington accelerated the war inside of Afghanistan anyway. Remember, our special operations and covert operation arms of the intelligence agencies, to include the FBI um, and some marshals, uh, would have pretty much had it wrapped up if allowed. With more troops, more and bigger American bases, more casualties, more destruction. When I arrived there with the company of 10th Mountain Division troops in January of '02, we slept in leaky tents, shaved outdoors in icy buckets, and used a splintery plywood two-seat latrine. Hey, Colleen, how you doing, bud? Hope you're doing good. Waste was burned off each day with diesel fuel. Ah, yes, burning the shit. We dreamed of showers. A decade later, a half dozen three-story brick apartment buildings had risen to house the military with paved streets and parking lots, giant fitness facilities and dining halls, and Pizza Hut and Burger King offering free delivery. When the invasion of Iraq was ordered, it was against broad public misgivings. Even if the president's dubious claims about weapons of mass destruction were true, there was no basis in international law or precedent for his proclaimed right to pursue a preemptive war to prevent Saddam Hussein from ever attacking the United States. It was difficult to see how self-defense under just war doctrine could be applied to aggression that hadn't happened yet. We're pre-criming it, baby. We're pre-criming it. But Bush went ahead anyway. If we wait for threats to materialize, the president explained at West Point in 2002, we will have waited too long. Of course, the bearded riflemen and suicide bombers who thronged back into Afghanistan to confront the Americans and 2 years later rose against the American presence in Iraq were armed with their own just war doctrine. Do not kill the soul sanctified by God, the Quran dictates, except for just cause. In both Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military applied just war ideas to its tactical operations, with results that will be debated for years. It's already clear, however, that just war provided little comfort to the troops on the ground. The men and women we agreed to send into our longest wars fought under clouds of doubt. If just war comforted the politicians and think tank savants who supported the wars, those who did the fighting were left on their own to decide whether their actions in combat were justified killing or murder. The result was an epidemic of moral injury and personal tragedy. When 19-year-old Joseph Shianu had come home to tell his mother, Debbie, that he was joining the Marines, she reacted in a way most mothers would understand. She grabbed him around the throat with both hands, pushed him against the wall, and yelled, "You can't do this. I've given you life, and I'm the only one who can take life from you." Then she sighed and wrapped him in a bear hug. I saw this was what he wanted to do, Debbie told me. Despite her deepest fears, Joseph came home after that second combat tour in Marja, physically unharmed. But the demons of his moral injuries, the nightmares of those torn bodies, the guilt over what he had done, followed close behind and eventually closed in on him, finally spilling over onto Debbie herself. Hey, Pat Scats, happy to have you here. It turned out she realized too late that war's aftermath was more dangerous for Joseph than being in war. Debbie and Joseph and her two other children, Tyler and Nicole, were close, intimate in the way families can get when times are hard. Debbie was a single mom and they were scraping by. The small two-story townhouse in a moderate income housing development in Greenwich, Connecticut was cramped and sparse. They did without. At one point, they slept on the floor. They were proud and defiant. They fought and yelled at one another, but they always ended up laughing. They stood together, and her kids were smart. Joseph, her eldest, had a sharp memory, the kind of student who could neglect his homework and then ace his test. By fifth grade at the Red Brick Hamilton Avenue School, he published 3 poems in the school newspaper. One written after a class lecture about drinking and driving, described the thoughts of a driver as he was dying in a car crash. At elementary school, Joseph was bullied. Debbie complained to the school. When a teacher suggested her son might be instigating attacks on himself, Debbie marched into the classroom and told her, "You are instigating me to bounce the ball on your head." So weird thing. Riding home in the car one day, Joseph pointed out the kid who'd bullied him. Debbie made him get out of the car and go punch him. He didn't want to hurt anybody, she said, remembering his reluctance. Once she punished Joseph for misbehavior, and he objected. "I can't believe you did that. You're supposed to be my friend," he complained. She shot back, "I'm your mother first, then we can be friends." And they were. When Joseph grew into his teens, he kept his two most distinctively boyish features, his rosy cheeks and his short stature, around 5'6". He compensated: earring, lip ring, eyebrow ring. He tried to harden himself by working out, but he was never what Debbie called a washboard kid. He went through what she remembers as his black phase, when he painted his fingernails black. Once he dyed his hair yellow on one side, red on the other. He's an emo kid. Hey, Lupe. Debbie and Nicole called him Halfhead. All that dropped away when he went to Paris Island in 2007. When the other Marines found out he hated the name Joey, they fondly called him Joey and taunted him for his rosy cheek. "We made fun of the people we liked," Chuck Newton once explained. "People we didn't like, we never talked to." Joseph and Debbie stayed close, even after he and Charlie 16 went away for 7 months in Afghanistan. In 2008, fighting in the southern town of Garmsir. One thing Joseph and I have had, and I have had, she corrected herself, is communication. She knew he had worried about the children in Afghanistan. He'd heard they could be aggressive, sometimes dangerous. Joseph had asked her once, "What should I do if a kid threatens me with a gun?" "Shoot him," she replied. "You're okay defending yourself." She worried while he was gone. She knew his company was sometimes called Suicide Charlie because they felt they were always being dangled out there for bait for the Taliban. Like moms across the country, Debbie stifled her feet with action. She sent them box after box of goodies, snacks, toiletries, boxers, cigarettes, socks, and Ziploc bags, cartloads of stuff from Costco. At home, she fretted, feeling alone in seal in a sea of upscale suburban Connecticut. Families whose kids were not fighting in Afghanistan. You just go around like everything's fine, she said, but I was losing my mind. She wondered, is it normal to be planning your child's funeral? She was grateful when she found a website for Marine parents that answered that question. Yes, normal. Something many military parents did. Charlie 16 was home at Camp Lejeune for 14 months before they were sent back to Afghanistan in December 2009. This time, they were assigned to help clear insurgents from Marja. The fighting was fierce and prolonged, and Charlie 16 was in the thick of it. They started taking casualties before the battle officially began. There was a lot of killing. I know he was having anxiety issues over there, Debbie said. They lost close friends. They blamed themselves. It wasn't until much later that she learned the details of that day when Joey fired the small at a building where women and children were cowering behind Taliban gunmen, shooting from windows and doorways. Joey Shiano was a classic moral injury. Using the small to try to stop the gunfire, pinning the Marines down, was tactically correct and allowed under every international law and U.S. military doctrine. It was a military necessity. In the words of President Obama, Joey's commander in chief back in Washington, it was morally justified. But the moral burden, the image of those bloody innocents, the guilt, the shame, the inescapable truth of what he had done. That's what Joey evidently took away from Afghanistan. The way Debbie described it, the moral pain he felt was acute. He loved people. He would do anything for anyone, Debbie said. One image in particular haunted him, she said. He was convinced that the rocket he had fired had gone through the head of one of the children. Even before 16 got back to Camp Lejeune from Marja in July 2010, Navy psychologists had diagnosed Joey with PTSD. He was having trouble sleeping, so they dosed him with Xanax, an anti-anxiety drug. But when he did drift off, he'd jerk awake, sweating and trembling from nightmares of maimed children. In a panic, he'd call home to make Joey laugh and break the tension. Debbie would try to quickly think up something silly his brother Tyler had done. One by one, his platoon buddies were getting out of the Marines. Finally, Joey did too, and came home to Connecticut on January 12, 2011. He left behind Frankie, his beloved pit bull mix. There was no place for him in Debbie's crowded townhouse. A day or two after he got home, Joseph called the VA to get help with his PTSD. Speaking of, as per usual, I have this up at the beginning of the show, but it's a good time to put it up. More important than views is yours and our mental health. I've stopped shows for my own before. The banner has all of the information. I know we have people from out of the country in here. I have all the numbers for PTSD lines, traumatic brain injury lines, etc. He was told to send an email request. Yes, Pat. As Debbie remembers it, he received a form letter from the VA 2 weeks later saying they'd get back to him. In 8 or 10 weeks, that was a blow. After 4 years of hard-driven, mission-oriented life, the Marines, Joseph was adrift back home in the civilian world. Sudden disappearance of his closest buddies stirred feelings of loss and grief. As much as he had chafed against the institutional confines of military service, he missed its structure, its predictability, its ideal of service. Like other veterans, he thought he could regain some of that by getting involved in law enforcement or emergency medicine. He got the books, he studied, but none of it stuck. Mom, I just can't remember anything, he said. It's okay, Debbie told him. Take your time. Um, he definitely missed out on some needed care. We'll blame the VA for half of it. We'll blame the Marines for the other half of it. We'll never blame the service member. The traumatic brain injury, obviously from blasts. The lack of reintegration, the lack of healing time for the for your sentences to get back, systemic failures, and what we need to do is write our congressmen and women, make our voices heard. Anyway, sorry, Cap. Sorry, but message me if you need anything, bud. One night he came home from drinking with friends and stormed upstairs. Nicole yelled to Debbie, "Mom, you better come up here. There's something wrong with Joe." Debbie raced up the stairs. He was shouting at himself in the mirror. "I'm a Marine. I don't need anyone. I can do this by myself." When Debbie tried to intervene, Joseph exploded, shouting that they were being shot at and needed to shoot back. Tyler tried to grab him, and Joseph turned with a look of hatred and screamed, "Gonna come fuck you up." That's when Debbie put her hand firmly on Joseph's shoulder, and he slid down to the floor, his back against the wall. "What's up, Hefe?" She held him and rocked him. "It broke my heart. He just cried so hard," Debbie told me. Through her own tears, he just couldn't understand why he had to lose so many friends. Why he was the way he was. He kept saying it should have been him out there who got killed. And he just saw the image of those kids all the time. Hey, Tammy. He lived with that image every time he went to sleep. But then he pulled himself together. He stopped drinking, tried to quit. No, I'm good, freedom fighter. Thanks. Made plans to fix up a room for himself in his grandmother's house and bring his dog Frankie up from North Carolina. He found a new girlfriend and would drive his Volkswagen Jetta 40 minutes up from Somers, New York to see her. He'd go Friday night, come back Sunday. On the way, he'd put on Zac Brown. The music with its haunting lines often made him cry. Just after noon on Sunday, March 20th, 2011, Debbie felt sick and canceled plans to get a manicure. She was lying down when the police came to the door. Joey's Jetta had run off of Route 139, a narrow, winding road in Summers, and struck the utility pole. At 23 years old, he was dead. Joey Shiano had gone to war with the other Marines of Charlie 1-6 and hundreds of thousands of other trusting, along with their families, that the United States held the moral high ground, that they fought under the banner of just war. Translated to an actual battlefield, that assurance meant the killing Charlie 1-6 would do was virtuous and morally sanctioned. Otherwise, it would be murder, a profound violation of the moral dictates of the world's great religions. It meant that even though the accidental killing of Afghan women and children was tragic, it was not murder. But if U.S. military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan were believed to be morally just, not only by politicians far distant from any battlefield, but on a personal level by the working class military, the trigger pullers. And why did the conduct of those wars produce so much moral pain among those who fought them? How did Joseph Shiano, who followed the rules and values he'd learned from Debbie and been taught at Paris Island, who fired his weapon against an enemy, a morally justified war, come to be haunted by that act? So haunted that he told his mother he wished he died on the battlefield. And why is it that we who send Joey and the others to war have not also felt their moral pain? The machinery of war continued to grind forward. The cycle of growing threat and growing response, powering both wars well beyond their shaky moral origins. Instead of just war, these conflicts became war justified by war. And we let it happen. Not only was there no serious anti-war movement, there was precious little questioning of the moral justifications of the wars at all. 3 days after the terrorist attacks in 2001, Congress had enacted the authorization for use of military force, which sanctioned American killing of alleged terrorists anywhere on the globe. The war in Iraq was begun, fought, and ended, and new U.S. military interventions began in Iraq and Syria without any significant public pressure to rewrite the AUMF or even to discuss it. 2014 and 15, a few members of Congress wondered whether or how to renew the AUMF. But as of this writing, despite a raucous presidential campaign and an angry debate over how to fight the Islamic State, nobody could be bothered. Remember, they also took our civil liberties with the Patriot Act. These are the people that send us war. These are the people that truly have held no accountability for their actions in bringing us to these wars. Not, well, again, Mr. Regan. Thus, the high moral purpose that fired our united response to 9/11 was allowed to wither. And the soldiers and Marines I lived with at war after 2002 fought without the certainty that their cause was just, that every action, every decision came under the umbrella of just war, that the killing in which they were engaged was not murder. In that sense, we all let them down, because war is morally complex and constantly changing. Michael Walzer wrote, decisions about when and how to fight require constant scrutiny, exactly as that they always have. The ongoing critique of war making is centrally important in democratic activity. News of Joseph's death knocked the breath out of Debbie. For hours, she could hardly move. Finally, she levered herself up from the sofa, tottered into the kitchen, smashed glasses, plates, and dishes. That's probably an appropriate response. Then the tears came. The regret and anger and aching sorrow at Joseph's funeral, the Marines of Charlie 1-6 served as pallbearers and stood as attention as his casket was lowered into a grave under towering breeches and cedars at Putnam Cemetery just off Parsonage Road in Greenwich. A glass display holding a folded flag and Joseph's medals graces the wall in Debbie's living room. On another wall, a large color photograph of Joseph, bare-chested at the beach, embracing his dog Frankie and grinning at the camera. The VA never had gotten back to Joey. But after his funeral, they offered counseling for Debbie and Tyler and Nicole. Debbie and Nicole declined. Tyler went a few times, then gave up and enlisted in the Marines. Debbie's own grief runs deep, her loss beyond words. She can manage to say, I miss Joey, but I think he's in a better place. There are inevitable questions about whether he took his own life. I know for a fact he didn't commit suicide, said Debbie. He had problems. He felt like he didn't belong, but he was making plans. Like other veterans, Joey said he missed the adrenaline rush of combat. Maybe that's why he drove so fast, Debbie thought, tempting death is a tragic measure of his moral injury, that Joey may have felt the only way to surmount his pain was with reckless speed. Certainly, he needed professional help. Steady, insightful, and caring. The VA has acknowledged its shortage of mental health therapists. and has hired additional therapists in recent years. But long waiting lists still are common. And while they are promising experimental therapies for moral injury underway, the therapy provided by the VA has had disappointing results. The mental health community, both military and civilian, is a long way from being able to reach veterans like Joey Shiano. With consistent healing help, after all, the origins of his moral injury lay not in him, but in the inability or unwillingness of our political leaders to pursue war under a clear, convincing, publicly articulated moral justification. Joy went to war without any moral structure to support him. And in that sense, his wound may have been untreatable. Talking with an understanding therapist might have helped, but Joey was on a wait list that he died. It wasn't Afghanistan where he died, Debbie once reminded me. It was right here. Betrayal is at the center of her moral injury. The failure of her country to support her son at war, its unwillingness to care for him when he came home, betrayal, grief, anger. Joey was dead inside of 12 weeks. How many guys are dead that were waiting those 12 weeks? Hire some more people. You've got a lot of kids coming home. This is a time of war. Cut back after the war. Toward the end of a long conversation, Debbie paused, exhausted. I don't know what the answer is, she admitted, except the obvious. There needs to be more people who can listen, she said. Don't care how much the story makes you sick to your stomach. Just listen. Don't turn your back. Anybody want to see the cute dogs? Holy shit. Hope operation is going well. I hope you're being getting your pants beat off there, Hefe. I gotta pivot here real quick. Gotta pivot. Let's watch some of this.
Whoa. Oh.
Like something Duke would do all day. Oh. All right. Get a little smile out of that. Yeah, it's heavy. I know what shouldn't be done. There shouldn't be cutbacks. Y'all broke it. Y'all fix it. I know that if we can find better care than the VA can provide, we should be able to go get it outside. I should say veterans in general. I'm fortunate to have retirement and can use TRICARE and with a mix of my VA benefits to seek external help. Uh, but I don't know. Questions, thoughts? No need to check on Cap. Um, I mean, called Try to Care. Yeah. No, you shouldn't. Or go to Peru to get it. The VA should be doing guided. Should be doing guided ayahuasca, DMT, microdose, uh, oxygen chamber. What is it? Because the oxygen is going to help heal your neural pathways um, and then the submerged. I don't know if I could do the submerged thing. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, exactly. What was I going to say? It's hard subject matter. I think it's it's so niche. Hopefully we keep growing and can get more word out there and more concern. Hey Boston, how you doing, man? So, and let's see. I want a certain gnome to be clear. Um, I don't hang out with Jeff and Scotto because I'm lonely. I hang out with Co-Pirate because I'm loyal and I don't spend all my time doing this, Todd. I don't sit in the basement. I actually see my kids a few times a week. Um, I mean, cope harder about where I have passports from or not. I can't help my heritage. Why? Why? Yes, Boston. I did. All separate locales. This is our besides telephonic contact and everything. Oh, absolutely. And Woodrow, it has been a phenomenal freaking rocket ship of growth from when I started. So yeah, I mean, clean. It's just like you and the guys um, on y'all shows. Um, we I don't know. I mean, it's just like my best friend from the army is still in Germany. Have one that teaches at West Point. I don't understand the locality uh, issue. It's just the garden gnome and his whininess. So, anywho, we'll see. I'll be up on Hill Pirate for a couple of hours. Um, before the LLC gets clipped. Uh, Good girl, Hazel. She's the bestest. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have dinner at my ex's and with the girls tomorrow. And Todd, but he's 100% correct in reading everyone all of the time. Um, so, oh, no worries, Spider Dog. I'm just bringing my kind of my passion out more that uh, Jeff and them gave me the opportunity to get comfortable in front of the camera. So I'll be up on Hill Pirate a couple hours before I have to turn into a pumpkin for more death by PowerPoint um, in class. So for a real job, Todd, I can do this and that. Anywho, any alibis, complaints? If not, I will end it here, and I will talk to y'all in a bit.